Welcome to SJ's classes. Video lesson, we will be discussing Dr. Samuel Johnson's literary critic that we have to confront as part of this module is William, of which is known as Partha tradition and the other as the Manipravalam tradition. Short introduction to the English novelist, journalist, essayist and critic. The two of the most popular Greek critics, Plato and Aristotle, is considered as a representative of the Greek era in Malayalam. That is a folklore mythological story that is being referred to here. Hi everyone, welcome to SJ's classes. It's a discussion of the article What is Literature by Swapna Gopinath that I have for you today. As you are aware of, the University of Kerala has revamped its syllabus for all those takers of BA English Language and Literature degree program. They have incorporated two new papers into the syllabus. The first being Introduction to Literary Studies Part 1 and the second Popular Literature and Culture. Now this paper I will be specifically dealing as part of my online lessons is Introduction to Literary Studies Part 1. This particular paper has been designed in such a way that it introduces the beginners of English language and literature to the world of English language and literature, and then takes you gradually into the various genres like poetry, drama, novel, novella, non-fiction, etc. The introductory part is done by two works. One is What is Literature by Swapna Gopinath and An Introduction to Literary Studies by Mario Clara. And in today's session, I will discuss the chapter What is Literature by Swapna Gopinath. Before we move into the chapter, I find it important to give you an understanding regarding the author. Let's have a look at the biographical and literary details regarding the author. Swapna Gopinath is a professional with an extensive experience of more than 22 years in the education industry. Her areas of specialization are cultural studies, visual culture, film studies, and literary theories. She is currently employed as an associate professor of film, media, and cultural studies at Symbiosis Institute of Media and Communication, Pune. She was also a Fulbright Fellow at the Department of Art and Art History of University of Rochester, New York State. Right? It is to be noted that she has to her credit numerous awards and fellowships, publications in national and international journals of reputation, books, and blogs. Let me also tell you something about this particular article. The article What is Literature was written by Swapna Gopinath for the English students of the Kannur University. It introduces readers to the world of literature. She ponders on the various perceptions regarding literature and also attempts at a possible definition of the art form. She tries to point out that reading literature as a serious student of literature will help a person evolve as a human being, fashion the notion of self, and build social identity. So, these were some of her objectives behind writing this particular chapter for the students of Kannur University. Now let's go and read the text. So let's see the very first paragraph. Literature is a sizable body of works, both written and oral, that has captivated collectives and communities across the world. So she begins the essay by pointing out what basically literature is. Literature is a sizable body of works. Sizable body of works means it's something which is very large in size, and it has both written and oral works of art, and this has or these works have captivated collectives. Collectives means a particular community or members belonging to a particular group. So these works have captivated collectives and communities across the world. That is how influential literature is. That is the kind of impact that literary works have on communities and collectives. So she points out what is literature and also the impact or influence of literature at the very outset. It includes both written and oral texts, folk tales. Folk tales, as you know, are tales circulated by word of mouth among the common public, among the common folk. So it includes both written and oral texts, folk tales, as well as epic. Now, epic is a long narrative poem telling of a hero's deeds. You might have heard of John Milton's Paradise Lost. We have epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata. So you might understand what are the basic features of an epic when I quote the examples of Ramayana and Mahabharata. So literature includes written and oral texts, folk tales, epics, narratives that deal with experiences of living in this world as an individual, probing into the depths of her psyche, exploring her interactions with people and the world, and as a social being living in human and non-human communities across the world. It is to be noted that Swapna Gopinath has used the pronoun her to indicate or to refer to literature. So there are numerous things that become a part of what you can call as literature. It is not just oral and written texts. It is not just folk tales and epics, but also narratives that deal with the experiences of living in this world, an account of your life in a particular society as part of a culture amidst a particular religion or religious community. So all these find expression in literature. And it also takes us deep into the psyche of individuals, and we are able to explore the interaction between literature and the world, literature and people, and also we express how we live as a social animal, and also we can refer to non-human communities across the world. So numerous possibilities with respect to literature. Let's read the second paragraph. From the fairy tales that captivated children around the world to the deeply philosophical poems, from the two-line poems to the long novels, from the creative writings in the new media to the oldest epic tales, man has enjoyed reading, writing, narrating, and listening to the carefully captured emotions and thoughts in a different languages, in different forms. From the fairy tales, you know what a fairy tale is. It's a children's story, often traditional, about imaginary or magical places and beings. So, from fairy tales that captivated children around the world to the deeply philosophical poems, from the two-line poems to long novels. So, what Swapna Gopinath is trying to point out that everything is part of literature. You cannot, take fairy stories or fairy tales apart from literature. It's part of literature. Philosophical poems that has numerous lines. Now, perhaps you can consider T.S. Eliot's Wasteland in this particular at this particular point as an example, and very short poems, long novels, that extend up to one or two volumes, creative writings in the new media, oldest epic tales. Now, all these are part of literature, and man has enjoyed all these things. He has enjoyed reading it, he has enjoyed writing and becoming a part of literature. He has enjoyed narrating tales, be it through their mouth, which can be treated as part of oral literature, or which they have written it down, which can be treated as written literature. So man has enjoyed basically literature in all possible ways, reading, writing, narrating, and listening to carefully captured emotions and thoughts in different languages. So this happens in different languages. It does not just happen in English, it happens in all regional languages, all national languages, and also in different forms. So when you take a poem, there are a variety or a numerous numerous ways to incorporate your thought into poetry. You can use sonnet if you want to stick on to a particular stanza form. There are other stanza forms like rhyme royal, terza rima. We have numerous stanza forms that can actually communicate the idea even in a better manner. So when you come to novels, you have different narrative strategies or narrative techniques. You can use stream of consciousness technique, wherein which you capture the thoughts of the character. You have first person, second person, and third person sort of narratives. The omniscient kind of narrator. Numerous possibilities, to convey what is there inside of you, to convey your personal experience of the world. Literature can thus be loosely termed as anything that is creative, anything that is a product of the imaginative mind, anything that uses language in ways that are innovative and captivating. So this is where we find, or where we arrive at some sort of a definition of literature. So literature can be loosely termed as anything that is creative. So it has to be original. It has to be creative means it has to be original. And it can also be seen as something that is a product of the imaginative mind. So when you combine the regular with the irregular, which is your imagination, when you combine what you see with whatever that you imagine, then possibly you can arrive at a creative work. And Swapna Gopinath says that that is what can be termed as literature. Now, anything that uses language in ways that are innovative. Innovative means be producing something like nothing done earlier or experienced or created before. That is what innovative means. An innovative idea, something that was never thought about before. So when you use language in a creative or innovative way, or even in a captivating manner, now all these can be brought under the realm of literature. This is what comes under the purview of literature. Let's move into the third paragraph. I hope you are following my interpretations of the work. Literature is a term that has been defined in various ways by writers and critics during the centuries, that man has been listening to stories and writing them for others to read and appreciate. So, what is Swapna Gopinath trying to point out? She's trying to point out that it's not possible to come to a particular definition of literature. It's not that we can have a universal idea regarding or universal definition of literature, because people vary across spaces, cultures, it vary. There are numerous factors that affect a person's life as far as that life on this particular planet is concerned. So it's not possibly, we cannot possibly arrive at a particular definition of literature. So she says it is a term that has been defined in various ways. And who has done it? Writers have done it, critics have done it. They have done it ever since they started listening to stories or started writing them for others to read and appreciate. A regular dictionary will explain it as a body of written works. A Wikipedia page will also tell you it is a body of written works which has some artistic or intellectual value. So she quotes some of the definitions that she found at different places. A dictionary will explain it as a body of written works. That is what literature is as far as a dictionary is concerned. And the Wikipedia page says it is a body of written works which has some artistic means something which satisfies your aesthetic standards and sensibilities. So something, a body of works which has some artistic and intellectual value, something which appeals to your intellect. So literature is basically a body of works which appeals to your intellect as well as your aesthetic standards. So that is what the Wikipedia page says. What strikes us here is the plurality of these definitions. Plurality means the state of being plural, having more than a single definition. What strikes us here is the plurality of these definitions, the diversity of these categories that fall under the broad term literature. So this is what strikes us. Literature does not mean a single thing. It cannot be constricted to a particular definition, and that would possibly restrict the scope of literature. So this is what strikes us. This is what must be regarded as something which is important as far as literature is concerned. As one progresses in an academic exercise of this kind, one understands that no fixed definitions are possible in this context. So this is something which I pointed out earlier. She's trying to point out the fact that you cannot give a fixed definition to literature. Literature will grow in stature. Stature means the level of respect that is gained by something which has an impressive developmental track record. So literature will definitely grow in stature, will widen its scope depending on the reader and her perceptions, vision, and philosophy of life. So literature will definitely grow. It is on a trajectory of growth as of now, and it will continue to do so. And these are dependent on a few aspects as far as literature or human beings are concerned. Things like reader and their perception, vision and philosophy of life, etc. Let's move on to the fourth paragraph. Yuval Harari, in his well-renowned work *Sapiens*, categorically stated that humans evolved not just into beings who could communicate in complex ways using shared language, but into communities that could share fiction, create events and incidents from imagination. So in this particular paragraph, Swapna Gopinath quotes Yuval Harari. Professor Yuval Harari is a Israeli historian, philosopher, and is the best-selling author of the work *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*. So she quotes Harari in this particular paragraph, and she says, in his well-renowned work *Sapiens*, he categorically stated that humans evolved not just into beings who could communicate in complex ways using shared language, but into communities that could share fiction, create events and incidents from imagination. So that is the stature that human beings have achieved. They have grown into, or they have evolved into a particular stature wherein which they can use language not only just to communicate but also to share fiction, to create events and incidents from imagination. So it's like we have reached that zenith of evolution. We have moved into that the highest point of evolution, where in which these capabilities have come to us. This aspect of human evolution perhaps best vindicates the prime place of importance ascribed to literature by communities and peoples, both temporally and spatially. So this aspect of human evolution, which is that aspect that we have grown up into that particular stage where in which you can communicate in complex ways using a shared language, and also produce fiction, create events and incidents from imagination. So that is the aspect of human evolution that Swapna Gopinath points out here. So this aspect vindicates the prime place. Vindicates means to provide justification. So this particular evolution vindicates or justifies the prime place that is allotted to literature. Prime place means first in rank or degree. So that is the kind of position that we have given literature. That is the kind of place that we have given literature. And this evolution, this particular stage of evolution that we have reached, justifies the place that we offer to literature. Communities and people offer to literature, not just temporally, which means in time, but also spatially, which means in space. So in time and in space, we have given this, or we have given due importance to literature, because that points out the kind of evolution that has happened to human beings. Moving on to fifth paragraph. Literature is to be comprehended in multiple ways. So it's important that we give an emphasis to that particular statement. Literature is to be comprehended in multiple ways. So that points out the possibility at arriving at different meanings. You know, a particular work of art might convey a meaning for a person, but it might convey another meaning for a second person, and yet another meaning for a third person. So multiple meanings, something which Derrida talked about in deconstruction, multiplicity of meanings. So literature is to be comprehended in multiple ways, using tools and methodologies that help the reader delve deep into the world of letters. So you have to interpret literature in different ways, in multiple ways, and you can use different tools and methodologies that are available today to arrive at these multiple interpretations. The content and the form used in literary works are equally significant, and enlightened reader will condition her aesthetic sensibility in such a way that she is able to read the gaps and silences along with the text and its explicit layers of meaning. So the content and form used in literary works. So in the previous session I pointed out that there are three components of literature: subject, form and content. So Swapna Gopinath points out the latter two, which are content and form. The content and the form used in literary works are equally significant. It's not that the form must be given more importance, the how, the way, the method of expressing or conveying your idea, that must be given more importance, or you must not give more importance to content alone. It must be treated equally. So the content and the form used in literary works are equally significant, and the enlightened reader, who is an enlightened reader? Someone who has knowledge and insight into a particular thing or a particular work. And the enlightened reader will condition her aesthetic sensibility in such a way that she is able to read the gaps and silences. So this is something which only an enlightened reader can do. Read between the lines, read the gaps and silences that have been consciously or unconsciously incorporated into a work of art by the author. So only when you are enlightened, when only when you expose, to a certain degree to literature, that you will have this capacity, this ability to read the gaps and silences along with the text and its explicit layers of meaning. Explicit means something which is clearly communicated or readily observable. So it's not just the explicit meaning, something which you understand after an initial reading of a work. You have something called the implicit meaning, that which is conveyed through using the terms given by Miss Gopinath, gaps and silences that have been, as I said earlier, consciously or unconsciously incorporated into a particular text. So only when you treat content and form equally, only when you are enlightened to a particular extent, that you can understand, that you can decipher these gaps and silences. Reading literature can be a pleasurable and fascinating experience. Look at the way how she puts our exposure to literature or our experience with the literature. Reading literature can be a pleasurable and fascinating experience. Just like when you take a journey, just like when you go on a tour, a weekend trip or a getaway. uh, just like that, reading literature can be a pleasurable and fascinating experience. Reader is an active participant who explores the text with an inquisitive eye. So let's break down this particular sentence into bits. Let's try to understand the first part. Reading or reader is an active participant. So who is an active participant and who is a passive participant? An active participant who gets himself or herself involved in that particular work tries to understand, as I said earlier, or as we quoted earlier, the gaps and silences, or someone who is able to read between the lines. So that is whom you can call as an active participant. You can just complete a novel, complete reading a novel, or you can go beyond it, by connecting that particular novel with your life or your society or the culture that you are part of. That is when you become an active reader. When you just read it, we are becoming a passive reader. So reader is an active participant who explores the text with an inquisitive eye. Inquisitive means curious. So you must be curious with respect to the text. When you read a novel, when you read a work of art, when you come across a work of art, you must look at it with an inquisitive eye. You must be curious as to know what made the author write it. What are the meanings? What are the possible meanings that the author is trying to convey? So you must be curious about all these factors. So, reader is an active participant who explores the text with an inquisitive eye, and therefore, literature can also be defined as any written work that demands and elicits a creative response from the reader. So, traditionally, we have interpreted literature as a creative output. So, as what Miss Gopinath is trying to do is that she's trying to bring in the reader. She's trying to point out what is the responsibility of the reader. No, there must be a creative response from the reader. It must not be the cliched response. It must not be a stock response, something that you give to a familiar situation. So you can be creative even in your response. So literature is not just a sizable body of works that can be called as imaginative and creative. No, it can be something that demands creative responses from the readers. So by stating this, she gave due importance to the author as well as the reader, the writer as well as the reader. Focusing on the content, Focusing on the content will help in a deeper understanding of the text as far as literature students are concerned. So you have to focus on the content and the form. What has the author incorporated? The idea, the philosophical truth, the concept that the writer has tried to convey. So, and how has the writer or the author or the poet conveyed that particular idea or concept or experience? So that forms the content and the form. So focusing on the content and form will help in a deeper understanding of the text as far as literature students are concerned. The form or the structure provides aesthetic pleasure. Now, aesthetic means concerning or characterized by an appreciation of beauty or good taste. So, what do you mean by beauty of a literary work? It can be the ways in which the characters are, molded. It can be the ways in which the narrative is, put forth. It can be the ways in which the subject or the theme is put forth. So all these add beauty to literature. So the form or the structure provides aesthetic pleasure, and the content triggers emotions and passions in the reader or the listener. So the form or structure appeals to, or it appeals to the aesthetic sense or aesthetic sensibility, and the content, it triggers emotions and passions in the reader or the listener. Flexible syntax. Syntax is the grammatical arrangement of words in sentences. So flexible syntax, it's not that you have to restrict yourself to a particular mode of writing. It's not that you have to, carefully choose all the words that have been incorporated into work. You must be flexible in that sense. So flexible syntax that permits imageries and metaphors. I hope what you understand by the terms imageries and metaphors. Imageries are images that are portrayed with the help of words, and metaphor is a figure of speech in which a particular expression is used to refer to something that it does not literally denote in order to suggest a similarity. So comparing two dissimilar things, that is what metaphor is. I'm sure you have come across these terms. So a flexible syntax that permits imageries and metaphors, vocabulary that is chosen carefully, and passages that unfold canvases depicting life with absolute precision all work together to create great literary works. So these are the elements that come together to produce a great literary work. It's not just the form or content, but also the subject. So here she talks about form and also content. Flexible syntax, that permits imageries and metaphors, vocabulary that is chosen carefully, and passages that unfold canvases. Canvases can be treated as the setting or a painted picture. So passages that unfold canvases depicting life with absolute precision. So this is what something that you must stick on to, depicting life with precision. It must not be too imaginative. So it must correspond to the life that you live on this particular planet. So you must depict life with precision, or as Ms. Gopinath points out, absolute precision. So all these come together to create great literary works. Debates on literature and its appeal that work around the concepts of universality, which means the quality of being universal, existing everywhere. So the concepts of universality of art that was once considered a benchmark for good literature are an integral part of theoretical and critical discourses everywhere in the world. So these become part of discourses, debates and discussions on theoretical aspects, everywhere in the world. Let's move to the seventh paragraph. With the emerging importance of cultural studies, literature began to be approached with a fresh perspective. So, cultural studies is that part of literature which focuses on cultures, varied and multifaceted cultures that we have across spaces, across boundaries. So, with the introduction of cultural studies, literature began to be approached with a fresh perspective. It is now understood as a cultural text, a form of cultural practice, with social structures and power dynamics firmly embedded in the discourses that shape these narratives. So, reading them, comprehending them, analyzing them critically unravels the dynamics of social relationships that shape the text at any given point in time and space. So, a particular text, a particular work of art cannot be taken away from the cultural context or cultural backdrop with which it is written. A textbook or literature is now understood as a cultural text, a form of cultural practice with social structures and power dynamics firmly embedded in the discourses that shape these narratives. So when a Malayali writer, writes a novel, he incorporates consciously or unconsciously, explicitly or implicitly, elements, related to our culture. He might do it consciously or unconsciously, but you find elements of a particular culture embedded or incorporated into a work of art. So, reading them, comprehending means understanding them, analyzing them critically, evaluating them, unravels the dynamics of social relationships. So, reading or approaching literature from the perspective of culture or with the cultural backdrop in our mind, it helps us in understanding the dynamics of social relationships that the text has or enjoys, at a given point in time and space. So, it cannot be taken away. A work of art, cannot be purely devoid of culture. It has in it. You have to figure it out. You have to analyze it critically and figure it out. It considers not just the literature approved and recognized as the best by critics to be worthy of critical study, but it also acknowledges literature in every form and also enables reading of every cultural practice as vital and significant. So it's not that you are biased against a particular culture, that you can just skip a particular culture or cultural elements that have been embedded into a work. No, it considers not just literature approved and recognized as the best by critics. So it's not just the best that is taken into account. No, it acknowledges literature in every form and also enables reading of every cultural practice as vital and significant. So every culture is given due importance. It's not that you take only the best of cultures into account, into your or bring it under your critical purview. You give due importance to all cultures. You treat all of them equally. Moving to the last paragraph, which is the eighth paragraph. Delving into the world of literature will open up fresher perspectives, and a student will learn to define literature depending on how she has been shaping her aesthetic sensibilities. So, taking a deep dive into the world of literature will open up fresher perspectives. So, so far you might have had only your perspective of the world, your way of seeing the world. When you go to literature, you will be able to, see that there are numerous perspectives. There are other ways of looking at the life. There are other ways of seeing life around you. And a student will learn to define literature depending on how she has been shaping her aesthetic sensibilities. So you can define literature from your perspective. You can see literature from your perspective. You can understand literature from your perspective. Now, that is the kind of position that literature gives you. That is the kind of level or stature that literature takes you once you expose yourself to literature. Reading literature as a serious student of literature will help her evolve as a human being, fashion her notions of self, and build upon her social identity. So look at some of the additional add-ons that you get as part of exposing yourself to literature. As a serious student of literature, if you approach literature as a serious student of literature, it will help her or him evolve as a human being, fashion her notion of self. So it will help you to evolve as a human being. It will help you to fashion your notions, fine tune your notions, refine, scrutinize your perceptions of the world, and build upon her social identity. Help you build your social identity. So these are the various benefits that you get as a serious student of literature. You evolve, you fashion your notions, and also you are able to, modify or build up your identity. This will in turn help her define and comprehend literature and its immense potential in the contemporary world. So all these aspects, all these elements, all these exercises will help you define and comprehend literature. So it's not possible to arrive at a particular definition of literature, but perhaps you can, define your perception of literature and also comprehend literature, which is, which is an enormous task, which is not something which you can do it easily. To comprehend literature, to understand a particular work of art that has been given to you, and also understand its immense potential in the contemporary world. What is the relevance of literature in the present world? What is the relevance of literature in your life? What is its relevance with respect to the culture and society that you are part of? You will be able to understand all these. So that is where Swapna Gopinath winds up this particular essay or article. So I hope you have an overall idea regarding what the work "What is Literature" by Miss Swapna Gopinath is. She basically tries to introduce you to the world of literature, tries to point out the relevance of literature. She points out what are the various components that become part of literature, and she also states that all these components come together to form literature. And she also gives due importance to the writers as well as the readers. And finally, she winds up the essay by pointing out the immense possibilities of literature. And that happens when you approach literature as a serious student of literature. So, thank you so much for being with me.